Hulk, Rebirth Part 3.
The muffled sounds echoed through the thin walls of the motel. Bruce, exhausted, tried to find some peace and quiet to catch some sleep. He had been on the run for weeks. Whenever he stopped, his pursuers would always find him. If he didn't keep moving, innocent people for hundreds of miles would be in danger. But they never stopped hunting. Again, Bruce thought of the fear animals felt when faced with humans. He had no time to rest. No matter how fast or far you ran, they would always chase you, and sooner or later, they would catch up. Unfortunately, Bruce was not an animal, nor was he fully human. He was a human, and he needed sleep. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon and turn on notifications to see the earliest videos. Thank you. Bruce turned over again, pulling a pillow over his head, trying to block out all the noise. But it didn't work. No matter what he did, their laughter and chatter continued to seep through. If he wanted to sleep, he had to leave or face them directly. Opening his eyes and rising from the bed, Bruce was suddenly enveloped in a strange blue light. The light filtered through the cracks around the door, illuminating the entire room. He couldn't stop thinking about the source of the light, but he kept his composure, walking slowly toward the carpeted door. The floorboards creaked under his feet, but that wasn't surprising. The building was old. His hand closed around the cold metal doorknob. He took a deep breath, both to calm his pounding heart and to prepare himself for what lay beyond. When the door swung open, the blue light enveloped him, blinding him. "Finally, you've shown up," a cold voice said, its tone like the clanging of large stones. "Put him in the game." Bruce listened to the chaotic sounds, the shuffling of cards, the scrabbling of wood on tile. Footsteps moved to the right, then the sound of a cabinet being opened, then closed. A sudden scent reached his nose. Nachos? After a moment, as Bruce squinted through his fingers to shield his eyes from the bright light, his vision slowly cleared. Before him was a strange sight. Hulk, and another Hulk sitting around a round table in the middle of the black and white checkered kitchen. Each Hulk held a deck of cards, with stacks of chips of varying sizes in front of them, indicating their level of involvement in the game. In the corner of the kitchen, another Hulk was pulling 2 giant trays of nachos out of a large oven. After setting them on the stovetop, he grabbed 2 more trays from the counter and put them in the oven, as if feeding this army of Hulks was the most natural thing to do. His voice rang out, smooth and lilting, with a silky quality that Bruce imagined to be like the whisper of a snake with a laugh in the background. Oh, look who's finally awake. Or maybe asleep! Hulk moved lazily toward the table, the light glinting off the pale scales of his body. His long tail swept the tile as he crossed the room. Placing 2 trays of nachos on the table, he turned to Bruce with a challenging look. "They started without waiting for you. Are you going to sit down or just stand there?" Bruce found himself rooted to the spot in the doorway, staring at the strange sight before him. 5 Hulks gathered in the kitchen that looked exactly like the one he'd grown up in, playing hold'em poker and eating nachos. Not wanting to waste any more time, Bruce walked over to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He scanned the cards in front of him. "Sorry, I just haven't been through anything like this before." "Well, get used to it," the giant crown Hulk roared across the table. "If we're going to be heroes, we're going to have to learn to tolerate each other. And I swear on all that's good in the world, Joe, if you cheat again, I'll personally strip you of your coat and shirt." He gestured to the smaller, relatively Hulk, who was gray-skinned and dressed in a 3-piece suit. "Oh, what are you implying, Scar?" the gray Hulk replied, his cold gray eyes boring into his opponent. "Look me in the eye and call me a cheat." He placed his hand on the table, the ring on his pinky glinting like it was made of adamantium. I was willing to bet that it was true. He had cheated time and time again. His cigar left a trail of ash on the table, and he drew the smoke through his lungs in a daring draw. As the Hulk began to rise, a quiet but firm voice spoke up. "Enough. If we want to get along, we can't fight over a card game that exists only in my head. Sit down." There was a hint of weariness in the voice. The Hulks obediently sat back down, seemingly unaware that they had done so naturally. 5 pairs of eyes turned to Bruce, while Joe comfortably crunched the nachos he had just scooped up. Bruce scanned the table and smiled slightly. "Well then, let's get started." "So? Len, guess what?" Jen looked up, her eyes fixed on the large man. Finally, he had returned to his original form. No longer Sasquatch, only the familiar Samson. Len smiled awkwardly, his hand reaching up to rub the back of his head. He replied with a bit of confusion. "Honestly, guessing anything right now is dangerous." Yeah, but think about it. He's been there for a week. That can't be healthy. We can't be sure, Jen. It could be a positive thing, or it could be a negative thing. But there's one thing I've learned over the years working with them. When they want to talk, they'll talk. Leonard, do you realize you just switched from he/him to they/them? Jen frowned as dust fluttered from the ceiling. Nah, I guess old habits really do die hard. I'm so used to seeing them as individuals that I'm having a hard time going back to how I used to see them. I better make sure I don't slip up in front of him, right? Leonard smiled gently at Jen. Are we going to keep interrupting him or stand here talking all day? Jen laughed and replied, You go first, before bowing exaggeratedly with a gesture of mock politeness toward the door. Very funny. Samson rolled his eyes, his tone mocking. If he makes a move on me, you'd better be prepared, because you're next. Samson paused at the console, typing in the code to shut down the simulation chamber. He had been locked inside for 7 straight days. No one was allowed to disturb or interrupt him in any way. His only word was that he would come out when he felt ready. But 7 days and 6 nights had passed, soon to be 7 full nights. The complex was starting to show signs of wear and tear. Several tunnels had collapsed during that time. Fortunately, no one was injured, but Leonard and Jen had been busy clearing the rubble and restoring the tunnels, instead of focusing on training the new members of Gamma Team on how to operate the facility. Putting aside their worries about the whole place collapsing at any moment while he continued his training, they both knew they needed to talk to him. An unexpected visitor had arrived, and they couldn't afford to delay any longer. As Leonard reached for the button to open the door, it suddenly swung open, and Bruce stepped out, looking perfectly groomed and freshly shaved. "Oh!" he exclaimed, clearly not expecting to find Leonard and She-Hulk waiting outside. "Jen, are you preparing for a fight?" he asked, his eyes lingering on her Hulk form. "At first I was, but now I just feel silly," Jen replied, stepping back, her Gamma Team uniform adjusting to her new form. "We were going to break the rules and interrupt you, so I figured after you dealt with Leonard, you could come after me." Jen said it with a hint of hesitation, hoping she hadn't accidentally offended him. She didn't mean to offend, but she knew that past wounds, even after so many years, were hard to shake. And Bruce, though no longer the excitable man he once was, still carried the ghosts of old battles. If he was offended in the slightest, it didn't show on his face. "Well, you didn't interrupt me. What's wrong?" Bruce looked from Leonard to Jen, waiting for an answer. He didn't have to wait long. "We have a visitor," Leonard answered. McAllen told them they had the wrong address, but then they asked for your name, so I guess they didn't. "What name?" Bruce asked, curious as a cat that had just learned there was a bag of stuff in there. He needed to know. Jen's voice was cold as she answered, "The Robert Bruce Banner." Bruce looked at her, his expression worried. "Well then, let's go say hi to our guests." He strode towards Rachel McGowan's office. Leonard and Jen fell behind him. Remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon and turn on notifications to see the earliest videos. Thanks. The radio blared in the teen sedan as he sped down the bumpy road. He had no idea where he was going. He couldn't see clearly through the tears welling in his eyes. His uncle had joined the army. His parents had kicked him out. He had no money and no place to go, so he drove. Every few seconds he had to wipe his eyes with the back of his hand to clear his vision. He was sure he'd missed the cutoff time, but he couldn't read any of the signs and didn't want to stop here in the desert. If they'd let him pack before forcing him out of the house, he'd at least have some clothes and some cash. That would be enough to rent a hotel room and get by. But now he had less than half a tank of gas left. Suddenly, he slammed on the brakes. "What the hell?" he muttered, not realizing he'd said it out loud. Wiping his eyes, he leaned forward, getting closer to the wheel to get a better look. In the distance, a huge metal structure appeared, like some kind of giant conduit. He had definitely never seen one here before, even though he had driven through the area many times, unless he was lost without even realizing it. Then he noticed the strange town ahead of the car, in the valley below. There were no roads leading into it, but a network of roads crisscrossed the small town. There seemed to be people standing around, but upon closer inspection, Jim realized they were mannequins. "What the?" He was cut off by the sound of an engine roaring on the road behind him. He hadn't even realized he had turned the car off and removed the keys from the ignition. He fumbled with the keys as he put them in the ignition. He didn't know why, but he knew he needed to move. Then he saw his reason. The letters MP painted on the side of the Jeep that was right above him now. Military police. Great. He had accidentally driven onto a military base. Today couldn't get any worse. Maybe if it rained, he thought to himself. The car door flew open as the engine roared roared and strong hands pulled him out of the seat. When had he unbuckled his seatbelt, he wondered? A voice was shouting, an old man in glasses and a lab coat, shouting about a nuclear bomb or something. Jim began to argue as panic entered the scientist's eyes. Suddenly, Jim was lifted up and thrown through the air into the Jeep. The scientist may be skinny, but he is strong for his size, Jim thought, as he crashed into the far door of the Jeep. Through the window, he saw the others running towards the Jeep. He couldn't hear anything over the sound of his heart in his ears. Why are they all panicking? The bomb won't go off while they're out here, will it? A bright green light answered his question. His heart beat 3 times. The shockwave hit them. He woke up screaming. What do you think about this fight? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you all very much.